If you want to pass your CeMAP exam without the overwhelm, then in this video, we are going to break down the modules, key topics, and top tips to help you prepare like a pro. My name is Borland, your mortgage business coach, and today I'm joined by Charlotte Hemingway from Future in Finance. She is a CeMAP coach who's helped hundreds qualify as mortgage advisors, so stick around because Charlotte's got some game-changing insights to share with us all. So Charlotte, could you break down each CeMAP module and share a little bit about what the core takeaways for each of them are?
CeMAP as a whole qualification, it's broken down into 3 exams. So you've got CeMAP 1, CeMAP 2, and CeMAP 3. The units that are broken down. So in CeMAP 1, you've got Unit 1 and Unit 2. And then in CeMAP 2, you've got 3, 4, 5, and 6. And then the last unit is CeMAP 3. So people can struggle to follow along because it's not as straightforward as it probably should be. But with CeMAP 1, it's 100 multiple choice questions. It's split into Unit 1 and Unit 2. So you get an hour to do your first half of Unit 1, which is 50 questions, and an hour to then do the second half, which is another 50 questions. Unit 1 is all to do with financial services products, really. So it can talk about anything from basic bank accounts, savings accounts, ISAs, investment, right the way up to things like gilts, Eurobonds. Endowments we talk a lot about, even though we don't really do much about endowments anymore. It's a huge part of these studies, and that tends to be one that people fall over a little bit because we're just not familiar with them. And life insurance is another one. So life insurance and financial protection. All of that is packaged in Unit 1. So that's the first half of your CeMAP 1 exam. The second half then is the regulatory side of stuff. So it's all to do with the Financial Conduct Authority, the Prudential Regulation Authority, the Financial Ombudsman Service. And what you find is most students will have a preferred side. So some of them will go, all right, the first side wasn't too bad, but I lie awake dreading the second half of the exam. The second half of CeMAP 1 tends to be a little tougher because there's no fluffy answers. It's like, how many years can you go to prison for money laundering? You either know it or you don't. A lot of people find that part of CeMAP 1 a little bit more difficult, but the way that it works is you have to pass both units to pass CeMAP 1. So you have to get a minimum of 35 out of 50 right in Unit 1 and 35 out of 50 right in Unit 2. If you get the marks in one unit and not the other, you would have to pay the full resit fee, but you'd only have to resit the first 50 questions. So that's CeMAP 1. CeMAP 2 is the same. It's 100 multiple choice questions, but it's split down into 4 units instead. So you've got units 3, 4, 5, and 6. They're anywhere between 20 and 30 questions per unit, and they all focus on slightly different areas. If any of you've got the textbook in front of you, if you open it up to the chapters page, there's a really nice way that you can break this down because actually they don't explain it in the textbook. But because you have to pass each unit, it's really good to know which chapters link to which unit. So in the book, chapters 1 to 9 is Unit 3, and then you've got 10 to 15, which is Unit 4, then 16 to 19, which is Unit 5, and 20 to 29 is Unit 6. You have to pass each unit again. And this one, a lot of people stumble over because there is an entire unit on financial protection and life insurance. So when I did my CeMAP 1, I was not hot on life insurance and protection at all. And I thought, you know what, I'll wing it with those questions. I'll just do my best and hope for the best. You can't do that with CeMAP 2 because if you can't pass the stuff on life insurance and protection, you can't pass CeMAP 2 and you're stuck there. I'd always say to people, if you feel like life insurance isn't your best kind of bit, do a little bit of extra research on it, find a little bit more material because a lot of people, that is the unit that they can't pass. It's 20 questions, so it's the shortest bit, but you still need to get 70% to pass it. If you pass a unit, you fail another, you might have to pay the full, I think the resit fee at the minute is £180 and only resit 20 questions, which can be frustrating, but if you've only got 20 questions to sit instead of 100, it's much better, and your odds are looking much better. That's CeMAP 2, and then CeMAP 3 is the last one. CeMAP 3 tends to be the one that most people either dread the most or they struggle with the most because of the calculations, but people hone in on the calculations like it's going to be all calculations in there, and it's not. And that's the one thing I try and say to people because they always come to me and go, Charlotte, can you give us more on calculations? And I'm like, I can, but you're probably not going to get more than 4 questions in your 60 question bundle on calculations. And if you do, you've probably been pretty unlucky. So let's not spend hours and hours on calculations that are not going to be the be all and the end all. Whereas with things like life insurance in CeMAP 3, again, you can't get over the line without it because you're going to get at least 2 questions per case study on life insurance and protection. So CeMAP 3 is a little bit different, that it's not broken down into units. You are provided with 6 case studies, which is about a half A4 sheet of paper, and you'll have 10 multiple choice questions for each case study. And you have to get 70% overall to get the marks right. So I always say to people with that one, do make sure, again, you brushed up on life insurance because that tends to be the kicker for a lot of people. But it's the general knowledge. It's how do I apply what I've learned in CeMAP 1 and CeMAP 2 into CeMAP 3. And that's pretty much the breakdown of all of them. You have to get 70% across all of them. From paying for your exam, you have 12 months to sit each exam, but you don't have to sit them all within 12 months. If you could sit them across 6 years and it would be fine.
You know, you said there's some tricky stuff. Obviously within that, there's some moments that are hard. There are things that people do struggle with. What teaching methods do you use and have you found that help students that you work with grasp these complex topics for each module? Because they are pretty dense. I remember doing my exams and they're hard, and I failed my exams very openly. I failed my first attempt by a very few marks as a similar thing, and it was very annoying. And so what kind of teaching methods do you use to help students grasp this information?
I really like to figure out what type of learner people are. I talk about different styles of learning, and generally speaking, you've got a few different styles of learning. One is being a reader, and if you're a reader, congratulations, because you could probably just pick up the textbook and wing it and be absolutely fine. But you also have things like visual learners, listeners, people who learn best by listening. You also have kinesthetic learners, who are the guys that learn from movement, and trying to teach those guys is my favorite type of challenge, because how do you do that at a desk? When I built my e-learning platform, my whole concept was, okay, I want to build something that is suitable for absolutely everybody. So it doesn't matter if you can only learn stuff by listening to it. Listen to audio files instead. Or if you're a visual learner and you need to watch somebody teaching you something, cool, there's video files. With the kinesthetic learners, they're my favorite because talking them through scenarios is what helps them remember. For example, I talk about the prison sentence for tipping off in the industry. So if you are found guilty of tipping off, which is where you let somebody know they're being investigated for money laundering, you can go to prison for 5 years. And there's loads of different prison sentences, but I teach them all using different hand gestures. So I say to my students, I say, okay, I want you to think about working in an office and your best friend works across the office bay from you. And if you've ever worked in a call center, when I talk about like that they put you in to suck all the joy out of your life, with those, if you imagine that your best mate is being investigated for something and you want to give him a heads up, you're not going to jump up and down in your bay because it's going to be an immediate red flag and they're going to be onto you. But you might just stick like one hand up over the bay to be like, hey. And that's how you're going to remember it. You only stick one hand over your bay, it's 5 years in prison. That's how you remember it. And I've got a series of them where if you stick to the little storylines and you imagine it in your head, you will not get them wrong. And in your CeMAP 2 exam, the prison sentences can be up to 7 marks in the exam, and that's nearly 20% of the exam. So it's huge to be able to bag extra points like that.
So how would you recommend then that students approach each module to build a strong foundation of the exam? I know for myself, like I said, I'm dyslexic. I struggling to keep on top of this stuff. And the exam booklet, which I think you might have to hand there. Do you have the exam book there? Yeah. So
Yes.
It's pretty dense. And if you're somebody that's not necessarily good with that, how do you recommend people approach each module and build that foundation of studying?
So for the guys who want to do it with just the textbook, and first of all, props to those guys, because honestly, I don't know how people do it with just the textbook, but it can be done. What I would do is say, okay, when do you want to pass the exam? The LIBF material suggests 6 months studying for each exam. You can shorten that down if you have a timetable. So when I was studying for mine and I just had the textbook, I basically said, okay, I wanted to do one chapter every 2 days. So in an evening, I would sit down, I would read half a chapter. I would then write up all my notes that I thought were relevant separately because I needed that extra bit of drilling it into my system. And then I knew there's 25 chapters in the CeMAP 1 textbook, which means I'll be ready to sit the exam in 50 days. The textbook is the material, but it doesn't teach you about how to actually pass the exam. So I always say 50% of your studying is figuring out what's in the chunky textbooks. The other 50% is figuring out how the exam questions are going to be worded. Because if you've ever seen them, they are so overcomplicated. It's like a different language. So it is a battle in itself. And especially you're dyslexic, I'm dyslexic, it can be so difficult. So if people are trying to study on a really tight budget, the one thing I would suggest that they invest in is mock exam papers. You can get them direct from the LIBF portal. You can download them in there. That will get you into the rhythm of it. That can be enough to do it. The other alternative is you use something like an e-learning platform because you can get all of the material in one place. You can listen to it on the go. With my platform, you can do every single topic 3 times over in 3 different ways and then move on from it. So you can do the video file, the audio file, the ebook, and then some mock exam questions and then go, okay, I feel good with chapter 1. Let's move on to chapter 2. And with that, you can basically get it done in as much time as you can put into studying.
Now, if you want to know how much it costs in order to actually pass your CeMAP exams, click on this video here where Charlotte breaks all this down, from your training fees, your resit fees, everything, all of the costs broken down. Give it a click. And if you've got a question, leave it in the comments.